Welcome, everybody, to AME Podcast, my quest to talk to folks who are lifelong learning and music education, lifelong engagement, playing their instruments beyond the classroom, as I say. Such an exciting endeavor because I like to talk to folks who continue playing music throughout their entire life just because I think it's important. And I hate to see when people stop right after they go through the institution. We are sponsored by Art and Music Emporium, serving artistic excellence. You can find us online at www.artmusicemporium.com. We're also on Facebook. You can give us a like there. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can subscribe to our channel. We do things such as repairs on instruments, we do music lessons. We also do a few performance initiatives, one being the annual Community Band by the Sea down in Wildwood, New Jersey, which is going to happen the end of July. Depending when you are watching this and what year you're watching this, I say it that way. We have done it annually, and it's been the last weekend in July. As well as this is 2025, we are doing the second performance of the Bethlehem Steel Company Legacy Band in October. Down where Bethlehem Steel was, we're actually recreating the company band. We did that at Music Fest last year, and it was very successful, and we're excited about that. Anybody can participate in that, and what I mean by that is we actually do a rehearsal the day before, and then we do the concert. Of course, I give you music prior to that, so don't get too nervous about those kind of things. But the next guest that I actually have on the podcast is one I met actually through our Wildwood community band by the sea, as I say. He came down and was participating, became a really good friend of ours, and has been with us the entire time. And it's actually this year, 2025, is our fifth year doing that
Yeah.
already. Can you believe it?
No, no.
Goes quick. It does really go quick. I know he also plays in many of other different groups, but especially the Westfield Community Concert Band. He is a euphonium player, another fellow euphonium player. As I said, we keep our low brass love together, as I say. So please welcome Joel Fleck. Hey, Joel, how are you?
Hi, Josh. Thank you very much.
So hey, I thought we kind of start off. I always like to kind of jump back to your days of starting music, whatever you want to indulge us with on this, just because I think it's very important to hear how people got started with music. And as we know, you're still playing, which is awesome to
Still
hear.
playing. Well, starting, I'll have to confess, but then again, like many low brass players, I didn't start on low brass.
Okay.
My dad was although by vocation an engineer, he was an outstanding flautist and started me when I was about 5 on the flute.
Oh wow.
And I, you know, I guess I picked it up reasonably well, but honestly, the flute was not my thing. I desperately wanted to play trombone, but I couldn't even reach fifth position, and my arms were too short. So in second grade, I picked up a trumpet and started playing. I was at the time I was about 6.5. No,
Hmm.
that was first grade, and started playing in what there used to be a lot of them around, a volunteer fire department band that my dad also played in. And there is someplace lying around in upstate New York a picture of us going under an underpass, marching in a parade. And there is a hole in the middle of the band where I am, but you can't see me because I'm so small. Anyway, my father also insisted that I not just learn to read treble clef. He insisted that I play piano and learn how to read bass clef and other things. Um, by the time I got to sixth grade, I was actually playing first trumpet in the high school band, and but playing and also playing still in the fire department band. And the fire department band and the high school band had the same euphonium player, and she graduated the year I was in sixth grade. And the high school band director came to me and said, trumpet players are a dime a dozen. We've got plenty of ones that can take your place in first trumpet. We don't have any euphonium players. And I understand you know how to read bass clef. Guess what? I have never looked back. It's been euphonium ever since, basically. Although I did start in Westfield on trumpet the first 2 years, and then immediately as soon as they lost euphonium players, went back to euphonium, and but it's that's been basically the whole thing.
Yeah,
Now
well,
I
I'm surprised. I'm glad to hear that, the band director didn't say to you, it's just a big trumpet, see? And try to
no, he was well. Although I will confess that the first trumpet player who took my place was also in my class, and he unfortunately got sick a couple times during high school,
Mhm.
and a couple times our band director came to me and said. He'd call me on the phone, or he'd call me down to his office and say, "Hey Joel, what? Yeah, what? We got a concert tonight. Yeah, Tim's sick. Oh, go home and get your trumpet. Well, I don't have, I don't, I got, I can't, I'm not going to walk 2 miles home. He says, that's all right. Come in the car. We'll go get it and come back and you'll play the trumpet. So, I go back and forth. And I've actually, it's not been just euphonium. It's, as you well know, Josh, you play euphonium, you play tuba, you play trombone, I play
Mhm.
French horn, I play trumpet, I play anything with a mouthpiece that doesn't have a reed on it.
Uh-huh.
Basically, I've done, but euphonium still is that's the love, and that's where I go from.
You sound like me because I've done that many times. Just like you said, it's like you're always, hey, I need a tuba player, I need a trombone player, even though you'll laugh this. Recently I've been playing, I don't know if you've seen on Facebook, I've been playing in this orchestra and it's a community orchestra and they don't really care. And I'm like, I'm going to play euphonium instead of trombone and break the
I
rules.
I always have said that somebody ought to sit down and say, "Hey, wait a minute. Let's think about this. A euphonium would sound much nicer in a symphony than perhaps a trombone." And maybe you double on trombone, but you come back to
Yep.
euphonium as the principal. But yeah, well, c'est
Yeah.
la vie. So no, and I went on, and actually, my first teacher, interestingly enough, was the first trumpet player in the fire department band.
Oh, wow.
He later went on to be principal trumpet at St. Louis Symphony under Leonard Slatkin.
Oh,
So
wow.
this was not a and then I went on and studied euphonium under the former trombone player for the Boston Symphony, who couldn't continue because he had a severe case of type 1 diabetes, and just couldn't handle the load with the Boston Symphony.
Hmm.
But through the years, I've played with a number of different groups, um, uh, ranging from American Legion bands to and competing American Legion bands. And then I went on and played 2 years with the University of Colorado marching band, and then went to Michigan and played with Dr. Ravelli, and Bill and I had some wonderful times together. And I have many stories that probably are not appropriate for YouTube about Bill, and how Bill could be a little bit prickly sometimes,
Hmm.
but
I've
he's a
heard that.
wonderful he was a wonderful conductor, and I mean, Bill would call me up and say, "Hey Joel, what are you doing this weekend?" Well, I don't know. Why? He says, "Yeah, you do. You're with me." I said, "What?" Yeah, he says, "Friday night I'll pick you up. Mary will make sauce." That was his wife.
Hmm.
She was a great Italian cook. And he'd pick me up, and then we'd be off someplace for he was conducting a festival band. By that time, he had retired from Michigan.
Hmm.
Well, retired in quotes because he was there every day. But he would go conduct a festival band, and if he knew that he needed, it was going to be short of a euphonium player or something, he'd just call me up. "You're with me." Okay, and that was pretty much Bill.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about him, kind of just grabbing people and doing all kinds of different things, from acquaintances and people who've been on this podcast even, who there were this teacher and all, and he would always, obviously, as everyone knows, a big supporter of bands, but he would definitely get the
Wonderful.
job done, you know.
He after he retired from Michigan, he was playing, to my knowledge, with at least three community bands, and he
Oh,
didn't
wow.
play the same instrument with any of them.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, and he actually, interestingly enough, rarely conducted them. He would rely he would just come in and play, and that was his style. But when he did conduct, he was a very interesting conductor. Um, I remember walking into the first rehearsal, and he basically said, "Okay, all you brass players, get out. Go study your parts. I'll see you in a week. I'm going to rehearse the woodwinds." He
Wow.
said, "The woodwinds are the string section of a concert band, and
Hmm.
I want them playing like a string section before I hear the rest of you guys.
Wow.
Now, you better be prepared after the week, you brass section, but no, he would go for the, now, obviously, when we play with a band by the sea, we don't have a chance to do that. You've got to
Yeah.
do it right. But
Yeah.
no, he was a very interesting character.
That's cool. Hey, well, one question I had for you before we kind of
Yeah.
dive into a couple different things. It was really interesting to hear, because my research and my interest of community bands and
Hmm.
fire bands, and I still play in a few parade bands that do those kind of things today. I was just interested, just at such a young age, of what you remember, of course. Like, what did you find most compelling to be there, to play in there? And I asked that question just because it was awesome that you at that age were playing in those groups and participating.
It, well, number one, it was a tremendous learning experience. Now, it obviously helped that my dad was there with me. I mean that, hey, that's a free ride and
Right.
and introduction. But there was a number of things I think that really were stimulating. Number one,
Hmm.
it's a learning. People talk about today, I think there's a huge emphasis, particularly in many communities, on sports and things like that, and learning how to play in a team. Well, I think that what people don't realize is that playing in a music ensemble and particularly a band, that's a team, and you
Hmm.
learn very fast how to play with the team, in the team, and in the bounds of the team. And if you don't, you usually they have ways of letting you know you're not playing within the team, and that's you know I think that's every bit as a team type thing as certainly bands are as sports. And by the way, I did a lot of sports too, but
Hmm.
that's not here or there.
Yeah,
But
right.
I think that's something that people don't realize. The other thing that I really, looking back at it, I appreciate what my dad did was that's something that stayed with me for life. You
Hmm.
know, um, at coming now close to, believe it or not, 73. I'm not a soccer player anymore. It doesn't,
Right.
the knees
Right.
and everything doesn't help any, but I can still play the euphonium.
Hmm. Yep.
And the other thing is, I think it keeps the other thing that was very good about it was the camaraderie amongst other people. And that's something
Hmm.
that people don't realize is that within a band, there is tremendous camaraderie. I always found that. And with the fire department band, there were people ranging. I was the youngest at that time at about 6.5, and the oldest was probably 80.
Hmm.
And it was a constant set of practical jokes or, you know, hey, can't you play any worse or something like that? And it was just a really nice thing. And we always had, there were parties for the band. We had Christmas parties and things like that.
Hmm.
But it was a tremendous. Now, the other thing I will say is it was a tremendous learning experience from a community perspective too,
Hmm.
because you march in the parade. Sometimes there was a little bit more than marching because we were officially members of the fire department. And I remember one Memorial Day where the fire siren suddenly sounded in the middle of the parade. Now, what happens? Everybody jumps onto the fire truck, runs to the fire, puts out the fire. It was a barn fire,
Hmm.
including the band. And there were, men, women, boys, girls, all of us went there and did something, came back all sooty, dirty, and everything, picked up our instruments and continued the parade,
Wow.
and then did a little concert afterwards. But
Wow.
that was a pretty typical. I mean, I don't know that there's too many volunteer fire department bands left anymore.
Hmm.
But that was a very, back in the '60s, that was a pretty common thing. I think there were leftovers from when the band explosion of the '30s and '40s, but
Hmm.
it was. And the other thing was you got to meet a wide variety of different people. We had,
Hmm.
as I said, the first trumpet player for a few years went on to become the first trumpet at St. Louis Symphony. But we had the director was he worked on the highway crew for the county, you know, and somebody else was an engineer, somebody was a teacher at Union College. You just don't know, and people don't under. I think they don't realize this is that a lot of these community bands have some absolutely fantastic musicians in the band itself,
Hmm.
and with a wide variety of backgrounds, and I think that helps a lot with the whole building community. But I think that's the one thing that people don't realize about the community band experience. There's a lot of building things together.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it right. I mean, goodness gracious. And I think like where else other than, you made a comment about a sport, for example. And like again, I'm not bashing sports. I love sports. Okay. I'm not
No,
not bashing it, but
agreed.
it's like where else could you be, 6.5 and be with somebody who's 80 years old and be contributing just as much? You know what I mean? And I mean, granted, yes, you could probably do some sort of sports together or something, but like to the effect of something that, so performance ready.
No,
It's
well, the other thing that was interesting, and I think that I'm going to wax a little bit nostalgic here for a minute.
uh-huh.
Uh, there used to be all sorts of things like ice cream socials that we would play, strawberry festivals in the Catskills, because we were out just outside of Schenectady in upstate New York. The other thing that I really kind of chuckle about now, and I was saying this the other day to a colleague, and I was saying, "Gee, we used to go on the political parade," and he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, politicians would hire the band to go out and play a concert." Instead of standing up and giving a big stump speech, they'd give a short speech and then the band would do a concert. And this was a political, this is how and sometimes we would go a whole weekend and we'd play an hour here, you know, get in the cars, go to another place, play another hour, and the politician would go around, and we'd spend the whole weekend going around the Catskills. And it was, too bad they don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Instead of, yeah, but it was a way also to see different areas, I think,
Hmm.
and and then as I got older and went to into the American Legion bands, and particularly in competing American Legion bands, then because we competed nationally,
Hmm.
then you got into some real experiences competing. I mean, it's not perhaps drum corps style a level of
Hmm.
competing, but it was pretty intense because the band that I played in, for example, we were all union scale musicians in the band, and when they were hired out, people had to pay for us at union scale. We didn't get the money; it went into the band kitty, and then they paid for us to go to state championships and national championships. So they would pay for our flight, our hotel, our food, everything. The national championships. So that can get pretty hairy, as you know, when you
Yeah.
march 3 or 4 parades on on 4th of July. Sometimes, and they're each one of them is 5 miles.
Uh-huh.
At the end of that, you're kind of, oh, please, I don't want to see another one. But but there's a again, you get again, it's a community when and it's a lot of friends that
Hmm.
you develop over the years. Interestingly enough, the high school that I went to was very small. We did not have a marching band,
Oh, wow.
didn't have a football team for that matter.
Yeah.
And when I went to the University of Colorado, again, I was not a music major. I was actually an engineering major in aerospace engineering. I wound up being on band staff. Don't ask me how that happened. Oh, well, actually, it was easy. I had broken my leg out skiing, and I had my leg in a cast of my waist. And the band director took pity on me and said, "Hey, listen, you can't march, obviously, but you can play in the stand." And I sat down and I learned how to do marching band formations and all that stuff. And he put me on staff. And the next year, I was writing halftime shows and having a great time, and the only non-music major at the time that was on band
Hmm.
staff. But
Yeah.
again, it's so much you learn that you don't and it's a lot of fun. That I think is the best thing is it's
Yeah.
a way to have fun for your whole life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's just interesting of like the experiences you fell into, and that's one thing I wanted to kind of make known. Like I know this, but people watching this
Right.
podcast is that how much you have gotten experiences in music and you weren't necessarily a major because a lot of people feel that way. If you're not a major in it,
Yeah.
then oh, I'm only, some will label with that big amateur word or whatever, you know what I mean, and don't want to do
No.
anything.
Well, and it's gone so far as something I never dreamed would happen is that 3 years ago, the Westfield Band actually played in Carnegie Hall. So, when you can get to
Yeah.
that level, it's you get experiences, and certainly, I've seen things and been around because in my real life job, I traveled around the world running international standards bodies for cloud computing and doing research.
Hmm.
But it's almost so people have asked me, and I like to put it this way, is that music provides me a way of turning off one life and going to and putting another life in there and being able to compartmentalize things and just being able to relax, if you will. Um, Although my wife accuses me, she says every time you come home from a concert, you're always, dang, I made mistakes. I did this wrong, but it is a different compartment than your regular job, and it is a way I find to relax, and that's very important, I think, too. And it also means that I've again, I know you have Josh too, but we've met some amazing musicians, and we sit down and you know, I know just the other day, speaking of euphonium players, I got the copy of David Child's new album that he dropped a few days ago. And both of us having met David, I took a master class from David. I don't know if you have had that privilege,
No, not
uh,
yet.
but let me tell you something. You realize that there's always places to improve and
Hmm.
expand when you I don't know if David would can improve, but I'm sure he'd tell me he can.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that. Like, I think about this a lot, and I'm in obviously the music field, but I think a lot of times, we go off, we get, in our fields, like for you, getting in engineering and doing this. And I'm not saying that once you get your degrees and start your jobs and do all of this kind of stuff, it's not that. you don't learn anything. That's not what I'm trying to
Oh,
say.
oh
You
no.
you
If you
do.
stop learning, you stop living. Is my
Yeah, exactly. And
that's my motto.
I agree with that, but I find like music is just it's just such a vast of like I still even with me and there's no ego here. Like with all the degrees I have and the experiences and the band directing and the playing, it's like I still feel like I'm a student of music, just because there's so much to learn. It's like
Absolutely. Every time you see something you hadn't seen before, you learn. And I know one of the things that I've started doing, particularly over the last 10 or 15 years, is that I've started picking up old music and looking through it and trying to. Sometimes it's just a simple editing job. Other times it's like, oh my goodness, this has got to be edit. This has got to be arranged. And I never took a class in arranging, but these are things that you learn, and you listen to what you've done,
Mhm,
and you're learning. And I think it's also great because one other things that I kind of left out is that I'm also vice president of the Westfield Community Band. So you get both the vice president and the president when we play in Wildwood. So you get the whole basically the board is what it amounts
the
to.
board.
Uh, yeah, uh, but I constantly am looking for both old pieces that to revive them and play them
Mhm,
because I love to understand how concerts were 100 years ago. How did Patrick Gilmore or how did Sousa or how did Pryor? What were their concerts like, and how did they interpret what they wanted to the audiences? That's always a
mhm,
wonderful thing to look at. But also, there's so much new music that's coming out for and quality, high level music for wind band that's just really wonderful to. And you every time you pick up a new piece, whether it's Spark or whoever or Graham or any of the number of American you composers, you learn. Frank
mhm,
Ticheli has got some wonderful things out, and it's you're right. It's that's the wonderful thing. You're always challenging your mind,
mhm,
and hey, if you don't challenge your mind all the time, it falls. It's basically like a musical instrument that's not played. After a while, it just freezes up, right?
yep.
That's that. Go try to go try valves that haven't been played in 30 years. Guess what you're going to have?
Mhm.
It's not pretty.
Yeah, and it's just awesome. Like, as you're talking about it, just how you've studied it and how you've edited and revised and composed, and it's just I'm with you too. It's like I would love if, there was time travel, for example. We'll get what the DeLorean, right?
Oh,
With the flux capacitor, right? You just go back and just like hear one of those concerts because even though I always say this, with the most popular was Sousa. It's like, as you know, he never allowed his band to be recorded with him conducting because he
now
didn't
not
want
with him
his
conducting.
sound to be heard, and it's like I would just love, and I know there's representations of that today, but I would love to go back and just
Yeah.
listen, you know.
Well, a different example is that in studying these things, one of the things that I found out was that back in at the turn of the 20th century, um, very few bands had saxophones in them. That was not a very common instrument in a band. In fact, it was considered almost a terrible instrument to put in a band.
Mm,
Um, Interestingly enough, a very famous person, well, at least in the band world, by the name of Joseph Ricketts, otherwise known as Kenneth Alford, uh, decided that a saxophone was a wonderful bridge between the brass and the woodwinds, and he
mhm,
started including them in almost all of his marches.
mm,
And it was through his efforts primarily that the saxophone was heavily introduced to military bands and has become a staple now.
Hmm.
Uh, I know that when we played, for example, at Carnegie Hall, there was we had a couple of I wouldn't call them judges because they weren't judges. They were more commenting on the performance and things. And one of the things that they said, and they congratulated our sax section, and they said that they were playing the saxophone exactly right because they said they were not standing out, rather they were providing the bridge between the woodwinds and the brass sections. And they said that is precisely what Adolph Sax thought that they should do. And he said that, and they were commenting that that was a real. But a lot of people, these are things that people don't get, and that's
Yep.
something you learn. If you can't, you don't learn. You don't practice, and if you don't get involved in it, it's hard to learn things like that. But and by the way, I happen to also be a tremendous. I will confess that I'm not as much of a Sousa fan as I am an Alfred fan. So,
That's
but then
okay.
again, euphonium players, any euphonium player that doesn't like playing Kenneth Alfred marches is not a real euphonium player, as
Yes.
far as I'm concerned. That
No.
you've got to be a euphonium player to really
Yeah.
love Alfred.
Yes. Well, no, I always just use that as an example because, most people obviously know the name of
No,
Sousa. It's
right.
just very interesting, how, just how supported they were. And I'm not saying that's not done today. I mean, I really feel that
I
people are going to concerts and those kind of things. It's just not as, I don't think it's as, as you just pointed out, that golden age of bands when they first came out. I mean, it was just explosive, it was everywhere of what I read anyway. Of course, I wasn't there. So,
no, no. Well, I think the other thing that's very interesting is as and you speak of learning and the age of bands is to look at that in that age there was an awful lot of work done transcribing orchestral
yeah.
pieces
Hmm.
to band. And an interesting thought, and Lord knows I'm old enough so that I don't have time to do it, but I've always thought it would be a wonderful doctoral thesis to sit down and compare the different styles of transcription of orchestral pieces into band pieces,
Hmm.
because you range from some very, I hesitate to use this word, but mechanical.
Hmm.
You take a cello part and that's the euphonium part, et cetera, et cetera. And
Yeah.
you go from that style to the style where you're saying what was the sound the composer wanted, and
Hmm.
I'll try to reblend the thing.
Yep.
And I've always thought it would be, and I found it interesting when I look at some of these, is to do that and say, okay, how does, and I'll throw, for example, Lauren Doe, who was very prolific,
Hmm.
but he was pretty mechanical when it
Hmm.
came to transcription.
Yeah.
Compare him to some of the like the Winterbottoms from Britain or something like that, who very much did the opposite. They were looking to follow the sound,
Yep.
and that's something else that I think that a lot of times that people don't understand is that's part of playing in an ensemble is developing not only your sound but
Hmm.
the ensemble sound.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, definitely instrument. I mean, right away when you're thinking of this, I thought of something that, with transcriptions, because remember, and just to kind of bring this up, the transcriptions back then, there was no the recording devices, as everybody knows, and that was how we got the popular music of the
Right.
orchestras out, right? Well, and I think about this sometimes because even some of the transcriptions that I love, and you look at like a clarinet part, and for example, the part is ridiculously hard. And it's like, but basically what the, arranger did, or translator, is basically just took the part from the violins and gave it to the
Exactly.
clarinets,
Hey,
you know?
clarinet, here, guess what? You're going insanely fast, you're
Yeah,
going
right.
insanely high,
And
and
not saying that, moving your hands and doing all of this is not hard technique, but trying to do that with air, I'm like, oh, wow.
no.
It's like,
Well, and also I think the other thing that that as you get more and more into music, you understand that the each instrument, and I know unfortunately in many community bands, when it says trumpet, it means anything in roughly that pitch. It can be a trumpet, it can be a cornet, it can be, if you really get into the transcriptions, there's a big difference
Yep.
between what a trumpet and a cornet can do and a
Yep.
baritone and a
Yep.
euphonium. They're not the same instrument, people.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
some of the transcriptions get very much into that, and they're looking. They follow that nuance. Now, as my wife tells me, hey, look at the audience doesn't know any better.
Hmm.
But I think this is something that a lot of people don't understand. A community band has a lot of reasons of being. One is to entertain the audience, right? One is to educate the audience. And I think any concert, if you don't educate and introduce things to the audience, you're really not doing, you're only achieving part of your goal. It's also to educate and challenge and get the learning for the players. And
Hmm.
that's a thing too. So you're running this constant back and forth, how do you keep the challenge and the
Yep.
learning inside the ensemble going
Yep.
and still do that to your audience? That's that's something that I think that people, if you don't get involved in an ensemble like that, that you miss that. And
Yep.
you that can be, forever. And you think, and you have to say, what do not only what does the audience want to hear,
Hmm.
but what do my players want to hear, and what do
Right.
they want to do?
Yep.
That's important.
Yeah, it's funny you brought about your wife. I will say this. My wife's biggest pet peeve is, as her being in the audience a lot, she wants to know what you're about to hear rather than most of the conductors just really just sit down, do the concert, play the
Right,
pieces, move on and move on and move on. She loves those little antidotes, as she says, to kind of give you some idea of what you're about to hear. And it's just like you said. I mean, I mean, just even instrumentation. We don't even do this today. But,
no,
I just had this conversation with one of my friends. You know, there's the cornet parts, and it's actually the original was cornet. There was three cornet parts and a
right,
trumpet part, and that's what the instruments were. And of course, today we play them all on trumpets. And it's like it's really interesting to me, like how that would sound different, just like how you say, if we actually had those right instruments of today, or even talk about that because people don't understand that. Or like I always joke about this one, the tuba, being in the low brass world, an E
right.
flat tuba. There's an E flat tuba part. Well, it's always played usually on a B flat or Percy Granger, there is a baritone part and a euphonium part, you know?
Or and people don't realize this. Colonel Bogey actually has two baritone parts and a euphonium part.
Yep.
Or even better, go back to the original Holst first suite for military band. There is a very definite baritone part that is not in the published versions, at least in the US. I understand that you can get it in England, but it's you can't find it in the
Yeah.
US.
Yeah.
And I mean, Holst wrote that for a reason that
Yep.
way. It's not sorry, there is a difference. And well, of course, the music instrument manufacturers in the United States so blurred the boundary between a baritone and a euphonium that
Yeah, they have.
the,
Well,
there's a
and
few there's a few of us that know the difference, but
yeah, well, no, I always have this conversation all the time, but it's that brass band, influence from the
right,
European, as
yeah,
that's the reason why they write these certain parts this way. And it's just interesting to me because, it's like it's subtly and it's just like how your wife says, or, how I say sometimes, like a lot of people in the audience just don't know. They're like, oh, that's a band, and that's it. That's where they stop, and there's so
right,
much more to it than that. You know what I mean? As far as like, beyond, I'm just talking instruments is just one piece,
right.
you
No, no,
know?
no. And It's interesting that you say that because one of the things that we also have done uh, over the years at Westfield is that we went from and a lot of community bands would, as you say, they'd have a concert, they'd have a list of pieces, and they'd go through and maybe the conductor would say, stand up and say, "Oh, and now we're playing Washington Post,"
Yep.
and that would be about the end of it,
Yeah.
or something of that sort. One of the things that we try to do at our summer concerts is that we put together a fairly extensive program with
Hmm.
notes on each piece, trying to
Hmm.
give, some of this background. So again, that's part of
Yeah.
educating.
Yep.
And many times what we find is that even the people putting together the program, unfortunately, is yours truly, but that's beside the point. Uh, Father's Day has a tendency to be not Father's Day; it has to be Program Day because it's the last weekend before the first summer concert.
Yep.
So,
I get it.
but we learned putting the program together. But it's funny, we have band members that read through the program say, "Gee, we never knew that,"
Yep.
or something of that. And
Yep.
it's again, as you said, you're always learning. And if it's not something particularly about your instrument, it's something about music, or it's something about the overall thing with the music. And that's, you know, I guess maybe that's just we all love learning is what it
Yeah.
amounts to. That's
Yeah, you might have answered this already, and maybe it's exactly what you just said, but I'm just interested in asking you just because, through the years, and I'm just telling you what I see, and it's not everybody, but what I'm seeing more of a trend is we go through school and we get to college and we play and we do all of this kind of things, and then school ends, and then what we call our life starts. And then from
Mhm.
there, I have many of friends now who I talk to and like, oh, I haven't played since. And it's always like, right now, I mean, I'm out of college or excuse me, out of high school, like, 20 some years now and college and so on, that they're like, oh, I just can't do it anymore. And I'm just interested, as far as you, what kept you involved with it, especially not even being, and I don't want to say it's the wrong way, a
Right.
music degree holder or going for that, but just kept you. And even today, you're still doing it, even as spending, like you just said, Father's Day, you're literally looking up things to put in the program and the
Right.
historical side of of the piece to offer to everybody.
Well, it's interesting, Josh. I kept playing straight through pretty much college, uh, and then I moved job to New Jersey
Hmm.
and had really no contacts down in music here, and I honestly just missed it terribly. And I went about 2 or 3 years, and then I just said, finally, I've got to find some place because I did go up and play some with some of the bands that I'd played, but you can't commute to,
Right.
up to Vermont or far upstate New York, and that was just beyond what I could do. And I think that it was part of what just kept me in it was again the idea that you're always discovering new things, you're
Hmm.
always finding new things, you're always finding new challenges,
Hmm.
um, and it's the other thing is, as I said earlier, it's the idea that I could go to rehearsal and kind of shut off the computer science and the engineering aspects and start thinking about something else. I found that when I actually had started college, left college, and then went back. And when I went back to college, one of the things that I found was that it was I treated college much more like a job. I'd
Hmm.
worked jobs, so I said, okay, this is a job. From 8 until 5, I'm working my job, otherwise known as college.
Hmm.
Then I'd go home, and it turns out that I didn't. I lived on my grandparents' farm, their small dairy farm in Vermont, by myself. and I would go out and help. There was a young man who rented the farm, as a dear friend, had known him all my life, and I would go out and milk cows,
Hmm.
and that was a way of shutting off college and and every night regenerating my brain in a different way. I
Hmm.
find that music does exactly the same thing for me. Is that so? If I go out and to a band concert, it's turning my brain from where it was during the day and what I'm doing during the day. And it's not that I'm doing bad things or things like that. It's just changing the whole thinking of the brain. Um, and I think that's the key is that you're always finding challenges and you're always finding ways to re-energize. And I know that one of the things that I also love, and you mentioned uh, this, is that in community bands, you always get people calling up saying, "I haven't picked up an instrument in 20 years or 30 years,"
Hmm.
and I find it incredibly rewarding to bring those people in and say, "Hey, listen, you know, come on, sit down, think about this," and and people ask me, well, because when I was working, as I said, I traveled a lot. I mean, I was on the road, out of the country, usually at least 1 week a month, and you couldn't. Carrying a euphonium on a plane is not practical. Let me put it that
Nope.
way. Uh, but what I did do was I constantly brought music with me. I brought recordings with me, and people would laugh because I would sit on an airplane with actually these headsets on, this headset on, and have the music in front of me, listening to the thing and sitting down there. And I tell people, I said, hey, look it. That's another way to practice. It's not just the blowing in the horn. The other part is just sitting down there, understanding the music. And people would, they'd also laugh because my fingers would be going, but that's, there's a lot of ways to practice. And
Hmm.
it's, I mean, you can't obviously just practice listening and seeing, but if you don't see and listen, and the other thing is that if you can find more than one recording for any piece that you're playing, do it, because that's another way of practicing. You're listening,
Hmm.
you're applying. So yeah, you know, hey, how to waste 7 hours on a plane, flying on a plane, is now, that's not wasting time, but how to pass 7 hours, shall we say.
What's funny, what you're talking about, it's kind of funny. I've had, as being a teacher, and I've taught in the college, realm. It's like the all of what you're talking, even students I have, that's what I call good practice. I mean, goodness gracious,
Yeah,
you're taking the time. You're right. It doesn't have to be on the horn. It can be with listening. It can be understanding, the chordal structure. It can be understanding,
exactly.
you know, um, just doing fingerings, because making sure the dexterity is there for you, and I say that because so many people feel it's just that time that you get together and that's it. And it's not.
Yeah, no.
It's like, even me, and I'm not by any means complaining here at all, but like, our group down in Wildwood, I mean, goodness gracious, it's, getting everything set up and then score study to make sure we're, I
Abs-
am, that's like, I always say this, I always kick myself sometimes because I'm like, I need more time, because there's so much to learn, and it's
well,
just, it's just funny to me that you're describing that because it's like, and I'm not trying to be smart here. Like you didn't go through those like typical programs that teach you that. I have, but you have that the same sense is what I'm trying to say,
yeah. Well, I think that also, I think this is something that I don't know where I picked it up, but as an individual instrumentalist, I really like to look at the score myself just to
Hmm.
understand.
Yeah.
And you do. In fact, I will argue that if you don't do that, then you don't really understand where you're fitting into the whole thing. So I would absolutely encourage people, if you can get a score,
Yeah.
get the score and look through it and look
Yeah.
how you're fitting in and playing, because it makes a difference. And
Hmm.
then when you go to perform with an ensemble or something, you have a much better idea of what your position in there and how you're what you should be doing.
Yeah.
You've got to listen, of course, but
Yeah.
knowing in advance is tremendously important. And you know, well,
Yeah. I know it's so funny because and to be honest, I can't quote some movie or little short something I've saw, but it was more orchestra based. But
hmm
I think about it for I always think about this for once in a while. It's like they would have videos of the conductor. And this is before they're in the rehearsal hall, before they're doing their performance, and just seeing, and I think there was a clarinetist and there was a violinist, and they're just seeing what they're doing. Like that's what they captured. And I can't remember what film it was, but just seeing how they're all getting ready, they're going through the scores, they're going through the motions, clarinet player
right,
might be working on some little lick passage, to work
right,
out. And it's just, I think that's what's amazing about music is that doing all of that and then seeing how it all fits together. Because, one of my goals and I think a lot of people know this is that, when you come to a rehearsal, you should already have your part essentially ready to go, because you want to see how it
right,
fits with the other
right.
ensemble. You know what I mean?
No, no, it's why I say, hey, if you can get the score as an ensemble
Yeah.
player, by all means, hey, that's important, just to understand. And I think the other thing is interesting is to get back to the old days of trend, to see the transition of chordal
Hmm.
structures for
Yeah.
a wind band. And I know a lot of people think that, oh, wind band hasn't changed in the last 120 years or something.
Hmm.
Uh-uh, uh-uh. It has changed so much that you cannot possibly imagine. And I'm not saying that it's easier now or more difficult now than
Right.
it was then. It's not true, but
Yeah.
the whole structure has changed. Uh, I think I had mentioned to you that one of the pieces that we're looking at right now for the Westfield summer program is a
Hmm.
an arrangement by Fer de Groffet, the famous composer of the Grand Canyon Suite.
Hmm.
He did during the First World War. He did a an arrangement of World War II medleys, and it's interesting that in that day, a lot of band composers did medleys. That was a
Hmm.
very popular way of doing things.
Hmm.
Still is, for that matter. I mean, if you look at a lot of the Broadway things, they're essentially medleys of. And what they wound up doing is they wound up doing a particular song and then a 4 or 5 bar break between things. Sometimes, maybe not even that. Maybe just maybe just a fermata and jump into the next one. Groffet does an amazing instrumentation
Yeah.
between these things, and I looked at it and I started laughing with our conductor. I say, I looked at that and then I compared to him to some of the arrangement that, for example, Robert Russell Bennett did, and how he orchestrated a lot of the musicals. And if you look at Robert Russell Bennett, he's totally different orchestrator than
Hmm.
than a lot of the other people that do show tune type things. It's
Hmm.
uh, and it very, but again, these are things you learn if you don't, and
Yeah.
if you don't, if you just, well, let me put it this way: if you just go in and mechanically play your part, you're not going to learn these things.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's like a number of years ago, I was at our local Y. I used to go in the morning before work and work out, and there was a young man there, a young man. He was at the time about 40, who's an attorney in the town. And we got chatting, and he mentioned something about, well, I haven't picked up a book since I left law school. And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And a lot of people says, yeah, we don't like, and I'm one of these people that, in addition to music, I love books, and
Uh-huh.
I've never found a book that my wife tells me you got to get rid of them. I no 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 no. Books are treasures to me, like music is. I collect music instruments, and I collect books. But I think there's something there is that you're if you read a book, particularly a novel, you paint a picture in your mind, right?
Hmm.
If you play a piece of music, my feeling is if you're doing it right, you're painting a picture in your mind. Now, it may not be exactly the same picture that the composer painted, but that's okay.
Hmm.
That's perfectly fine.
Hmm.
The conductor is there is to bring all of the pictures together so you have a big landscape, right?
Hmm.
That's what the conductor. Now, you can tell me I'm crazy here, but that's
You're
my
not.
idea of what a conductor is. They're bringing the little paintings together,
Mhm.
the little parts of the painting, and building a big landscape, right? It's like if you do in photography. It used to be you didn't have wide angle lenses and things. So what you did was you stitched photographs together and made a very high res
Yeah.
landscape. Isn't that's precisely in my mind what a conductor is doing?
Yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. I mean, you're exactly right. I mean, because you're getting beyond what the music is on the page,
Right.
just being mechanical that way. And then you're
Uh-huh.
also looking at how it all connects together and what everybody else's perceptions are. I mean, you hit you hit the nail right on the head. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, I feel like, and me being a conductor, I'll say it this way, it's like it's trying to bring in, what the composer envisions, and of course what I was looking at and what everybody else is too. And sometimes that's a hard road, to get
Oh,
everything, exactly together. But that's where the magic of music happens, you know?
and, and I think that's also well. I'll put one other analogy if I can out,
Yeah, sure.
Josh, is that if you have ever done any public speaking to a large audience,
Hmm.
one of the things you learn very quickly is, and maybe not even a large, if you're doing teaching and when I was at university, I did teaching some classes, and one of the things you learn pretty fast is that if you pay attention to the audience,
Hmm.
and if you're losing the audience, you've got a problem.
Hmm.
Now, in music as a conductor, you don't have the luxury of watching the audience. You're
Hmm.
watching the band, but you can. I still believe you can tell,
Yeah, you can sense.
and you can sense when you're and that's and you also know you can anticipate what the audience what the audience wants, and that's what the conductor is doing. Is they're almost pre-sensing what the
Hmm.
audience wants, and that it's not an easy job. That's
Hmm.
but that if you don't pay attention to your audience, you're not going to get them back.
Yep. Hmm. Yep.
You know, I laughingly say that at the summer concerts in the park that we do, that we could play Stars and Stripes Forever 14 times and still get a standing ovation at the end of the 14th one.
Hmm.
The audience would love it. The band would be bored to tears. And after a while, the audience would start saying, "Oh, all right, we've heard that more than once. More, let's forget that." But it, so you've got this very fine line between what do they think they want and what can you provide that
Yep.
will expand what they think they want. That's always a
Yep.
fine line too.
Yeah, well, just like you said, it's like it's the I think it's sometimes like a triangle. It's like you want to be entertaining, right? Because music is
Yeah,
entertainment. We
absolutely,
we know we want
absolutely,
that, right? But then we also
absolutely.
want to be, engaging for audience and the performers, because just exactly what you
Exactly.
said, like you could lose people, who even play in the band if it becomes
Oh,
boring. Like you said, if that's
yeah.
all we did was like 14 times the Stars and Stripes Forever. And then of course academic. and it's like looking at those three different points, trying to provide that. And it's just, just to get people to, and I think that's, going back to like, and this is just my opinion, going back to that golden age of bands, I think that with the transcriptions kind of coming in from the orchestra, they were already popular. So they already had that
Oh,
entertainment
absolutely.
fast, yeah, it was already there. But of course, like, those directors, as you know, they took it to the next level to engage. And that's the fun part, I think, is, which makes just band exciting.
Well, and I think the other thing that a lot of people that are not uh, that either have dropped music or never really got into music don't understand is that there's also tremendous amounts of humor, not just in the music, but within the musicians
Yep.
themselves.
Hmm.
Um, and that's always part of the community that brings it in. And if you could
Hmm.
bring out that humor, I remember, I think I was in high school, I took a master class from one of probably the finest cornetists in the world, Jimmy Burke, who uh, was a soloist for years with his own band, and prior to that, the Goldman Band.
Hmm.
Uh, and Jimmy Burke was very interesting in that he was born without a right arm. In fact, his arm was deformed so that he had it ended at the elbow, and he
Hmm.
had just a few vestige fingers sitting there. And he was also a tremendous disciple of the no pressure method. And I remember him demonstrating uh, hanging his cornet, suspending it above him, and walking up with his left arm behind his back and walking up and playing with just the pressure from the what can't do that. I am not a disciple of this, so I can't, and I never was it never was there.
Uh-huh.
Um, but a young man in the audience raised his hand and said, "What happened to your arm?" And the audience just went, "Oh!" It was like, "Oh my God, you don't ask that." And Jimmy Burke looked at him and said, "That's the evil of pressure. I wore it out pressing too hard." And I mean, it was just like, how, it was. Now, I'm sure he'd had that question asked to him many, many times
Yep.
before,
Yep.
but it was just the humor is there, and if
Yeah.
you don't, it's that's and he didn't take offense at it. To
Yep.
him, it was just, oh, all right, this is yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. I know I've heard that technique a couple times. I know I've tried it. I'll be honest, I'm not that great at it either. It always
I,
the instrument goes away from
the upper range on the euphonium still
you.
requires me
Yeah.
pushing some.
And probably if that's my problem with some of my notes, I'll say it that way.
Well,
Uh,
speaking of euphonium, I've also heard one that I learned this in the UK. One time I was on a business trip over there and was invited to play with one of the top level brass bands in the rehearsal.
mhm.
And I went in there, and the euphonium player that was the regular principal euphonium player was just an outstanding player. And he laughingly said, I was asking him, who he studied with and one thing and another. And he's mentioned a very famous euphonium player from the mid 60s. And I said, well, what advice did he give you? And he said, well, when I first walked into him, he told me he handed me a table tennis ball, told me to put it in my mouth, not pick up my instrument, just a mouthpiece. And for the next week, that's the only way I could play.
Wow.
It was the whole idea of opening up your mouth. Now,
Hmm.
honestly, I've tried that, and it's no, 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 no.
Yeah.
My mouth doesn't. But again, these are things
I know little techniques.
everybody had, and you learn them. That's the
Yeah.
other. It's funny when I was traveling all the time. One of the things I loved to do was to go find little, concert bands or an
Hmm.
orchestra or whatever,
Yep.
and you again challenge yourself,
Yep.
have fun, but always have fun. That's the thing. If you don't have fun, and I know, Josh, that's one of the things that we always say about playing down at Wildwood. it's well, Barry, the president, and I go down. We
Mhm.
say it's great for us because we have no pressure. The pressure's all on Josh, but we have fun. We enjoy it, and we do. It's fun.
Well,
And if you're not having fun with music, you're in the wrong.
yep.
Go find something else and have some fun. But music is fun. It better be fun, right?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, hey, as we're wrapping this up, and I know you've said some great things already, but I kind of go over this just a little bit, and again, it might be a more of a recap because I know we've gotten pretty deep with music making. But I've been asking a lot of people, you know, I've asked you what your engagement was and what kept you
Mhm.
going and all those kind of things. But I wanted to hear, you did bring up that you brought a lot of people who have played before back into
Right.
the world of playing again. And
Mhm.
I love that. And that's actually one of my, again, the lifelong learning that I'm trying to, capture these voices of that. What do you, and as we're wrapping this up, I wanted to get an idea of what would you say to folks, to get them to come back to play, especially, even if they were a pretty decent performer. And I'm not, being coy here, but just saying, they played at top of their game and then it's been 20 years or whatever it's been. And it's not there because, as you said, the valves get rusty and
Yeah.
get stuck.
And,
We
and,
know
and
that.
the chops get
Yep,
rusty too. But
exactly. But I was just interested to see, what your words of wisdom is about that.
well, I think part of it is have fun. Don't make it a chore. And I think unfortunately that's one of the reasons why they leave in the first place because it was a chore. Um, and that's exactly the wrong thing. It is the first thing is to have fun. The second thing is find a group that you can have fun in. You know, if you're going to a group that's going to push far beyond where you really want to go, you don't. That's not where you should be. Go find a group that can be at your level, at what you want to do, and you can enjoy. Because you know, yeah, I have been in situations where you were pushed, and I'm sure you have too, where you pushed, and you might learn from it, but it's not something you want to do as a steady diet and do it
Right.
all the time.
Hmm.
The other thing is that, and I will say this more to casual players that stopped and have come back, is you come back, you don't need the best instrument,
Hmm.
just have something and bands don't expect you to have the top of the line.
Hmm.
That's not, that's it's again, enjoy, and by all means don't go in and interact with the other musicians and let them teach you and let you teach them.
Hmm.
You know, so make it a two-way street, and that's always. And one of the things that I find is a lot of times musicians come into a new ensemble and they're afraid of the conductor or the senior people. Don't be. If that's the kind of thing that they're inspiring in you, that's wrong. That's a wrong place to be, because approach them, talk to them, learn from them,
Hmm.
and that's part of coming back into it. Is again, have fun and interact with the group, and you know you're you will always, and I can't think of a group where you wouldn't be accept you wouldn't they wouldn't welcome that for you. If they don't, it's not the right place. It's not the right place, let me put it that way. But and does that mean that you're not gonna have disappointments? No, you always will have disappointments, but remember, enjoy it and have fun. And yeah, there's times, hey, I'm sure Josh, you and I have played many, many wrong notes
Yes, we
and
have.
done some horrendous blunders, and we still and I still do all the time.
Uh-huh.
In the long run, what are you doing? Nobody's perfect, right?
Nope.
No matter how good you are, you're not perfect, and I'm not even 50% of the way there. So I'm not even going to go there. But and going back to the instrument, it is. I laughingly say, I spent the better until at college they loaned me some very fine euphoniums, but I played until I was in my mid 40s on a 1921 double bell York. That's that's no means
Yeah.
a professional horn,
Yep.
but it was more than it was enough. Now there was a point in time where I said, "Hey, listen, I need something more to
Hmm.
play," and that's fine. But you can learn them and have an awful lot of fun and play an awful lot of music on. I'm not saying a student, but but a reasonable intermediate class horn. You can do it. You do an awful lot. Don't think the horn it makes the player. It's the player that makes the horn. I mean, put it that way.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's great words of wisdoms. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean,
No,
definitely. I mean, definitely just thinking about, the instrument, just getting out there and play and whatever you have, and then there's always ways to change
but
it up. I mean, definitely. And even though
you can.
I,
There's so much many things that you can change. Yeah, and
yeah, I
you
know.
know, and the other thing I will say is it is you can always there's other things you can do. You can pick up something and I'll joke about this is that 2 years ago, a very dear friend who plays euphonium with me or did uh, walked up to me and said, "Would you like to join my Alphorn group?" What? I knew what an Alphorn was, but and he said, "Yeah." He says, By the way, he's the man that did the famous Ricola commercials,
Right.
and hey, it's a heck of a lot of fun. Believe it or not, you go out to German festivals and dressed in lederhosen and the whole bit, and people are all over you. And then it's like, how much does that thing weigh? How do
Yep.
is it hard to play? Well, yeah, it is hard to play because there's no valves on it. It's really hard to play, but totally different. Totally different instrument. Suddenly, the only commonality is that you stick a mouthpiece to your chops, and but you still have it's fun. It's totally different. Always go for it. You can change up instruments if you want to. I don't,
Yeah.
Hey, how many different instruments do you play, Josh, on a regular basis?
Oh, goodness gracious. I mean,
Your
well,
tuba,
yeah, I
trombone,
play
euphonium.
tuba, trombone, euphonium, and I'm teaching right now, so I've been playing trumpet a lot. So,
Hmm.
so yeah. But
Well, I had somebody approach me about playing Easter service, and it was a good friend, and she said, "Well, we need a lead trumpet player." And I said, "Karen, I'm sorry." I said, "I can play trumpet, but I wouldn't want to be a lead trumpet player at this time point in my life.
Yep.
I'm just not there." And she said, "Well, we can't find one. What should we do?" And I said, "Well, all those things for brass quintet. Why don't we arrange them for a low brass quintet?"
There you go. Why not?
That's what we did.
Yeah.
So the trumpet parts were played on E flat alto horn, tenor horns.
Yeah, why not?
Works.
It
Yeah.
works.
Improvise.
That's
Do
right.
something.
That's right.
Yep.
Well, hey, Joel,
Alrighty.
I want to thank you so much for being on this.
Oh, you're quite
I
welcome.
appreciate it. And I also, it's awesome to hear just all your experiences, as well as, being a large supporter of our,
Oh,
band by
no.
the sea down in Wildwood. And I appreciate that. And as well as, as I keep saying, if you are around Westfield and, you're looking for a band to play, I mean, definitely look up Joel and Barry, and they're there. You know,
We're there every Wednesday evening throughout the year. I mean, we don't unlike a lot of, and that's one of the things I think that's really changing. It's interesting is that a lot of bands, particularly community bands, years ago used to take like a winter hiatus,
yeah,
or in the South, a summer hiatus.
yeah, right, right.
More and more, I'm finding there's bands that don't go on hiatus.
Yeah, they don't go on hiatus anymore. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And by the way, even if that's the other thing I know people are afraid of, and I'll leave it with this is a lot of some bands have auditions, some bands don't. But that still contact them, and they'll know where you can find other
Yeah.
band members. Usually know every other band around with it, and they'll find places. You always can find a place to play. I mean, I can't think of a place, and most bands, if you even walk in the day before a concert, if
Hmm.
there a lot of community bands will say, "Well, bring your horn, come on over, play with us." They love people to play. So get that horn out of the box, out of the dusty closet, and bring it out and give it some love.
Very well said. Well, thank you so much again, Joel, and
Sure.
thank you for being such an inspiration with all of
Oh,
this. So
well, I don't know about that, but
you are, because you're still playing, and like I said, you're doing all this kind of great stuff. So thank you so much.
sure, you're quite welcome.